Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
It is time once again for us to have some book-ish fun. Welcome! This is the Books That Make You show, and I am Desiree Duffy, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about books that make you climb right out of that painful divorce. Yeah, we're talking about divorce. This can be one of the most devastating life events that we experience. If you've gone through it or you know of somebody that has, then you understand that it affects our emotional, physical, professional, our family life in so many different ways. And one of the amazing things about books is that they can be one of your most valuable tools when you need help. They're often written by experts and those who have gone through what you are dealing with, and they become like a friend in the middle of this storm. In the case of divorce, Susan Shofer is known as your divorce and custody ally, and she is the author of a book called The Divorce and Recovery Ladder, and it's a guide for people who are going through or about to go through a divorce. Susan has this amazing backstory. She's a private investigator who went through her own devastating divorce, but today she is a certified divorce coach, and her mission is to help others and guide them through their own divorce. She is truly an asset when you need help or information about dealing with all aspects of divorce and custody, the legal system, the courtroom, lawyers, your health, finances, and so much more. Susan Shofer, welcome to the show.
Hi, Desiree. And boy, that's going to be a hard act to follow. You really, wow.
Well, you are a hard act to follow. Let me just say, you do so much, and it was challenging to kind of fit everything into that introduction. I have about a minute to do that because here you are. You are this amazing woman who took her own situation and your experience, your knowledge of the courtrooms and being a private investigator, and you've taken that and you've turned it into a way to help other people. And I think that's so admirable. Can you talk a little bit about that and about writing this book, The Divorce Recovery Ladder, and why it is that you want to now help others?
Well, the idea of the book came to me when I was going through my own divorce. Here I was, a private investigator, very well versed in the workings of the legal system. All my clients were attorneys at the time, and yet I found the whole scenario, the whole experience daunting. And throughout my entire experience, I thought, what happens to people who don't have this experience? Most people don't have court experience. They don't deal with lawyers. The most people ever have with this kind of experience is maybe a traffic ticket. And so I thought about it way back then about, if I get through this alive, I will share my experience with others and show them how to go through the divorce process. And what it did is it just blossomed into the whole divorce coaching. So we cover just about every aspect of divorce, from finding the right attorney to financial settlements to, as you mentioned earlier, taking care of oneself during divorce. It's a harrowing experience, and often people put themselves on the back burner. We talk about keeping ourselves safe if we have a former spouse or former spouse to be who's stalking us or threatening anybody, the children. We talk about custody issues. It's a huge part of it. We talk about going into therapy, getting children into therapy. So it really encompasses every aspect of divorce.
And when is it that somebody should grab a copy of this book? Should they do it when they think a divorce is coming, when they know they're going through a divorce? And is it also something that can help people who might have already been through a divorce?
All three. All three. Obviously, the best time to grab the book would be if one is contemplating divorce, because it diffuses some of the fear. And that's one of the things that everybody encounters when they start the divorce process, the fear of the unknown. What's going to happen to them financially? Will they stay in the house? What's going to happen with the children if there are children? So ideally, this would be the best time to get the book. But if somebody's in the throes of a divorce and they feel overwhelmed and they're challenged by going to court, or they don't know how to behave in court, or they're nervous about it, what a great time to pick it up. And of course, after the fact, sometimes the ink dries on the divorce decree, but that doesn't mean everything's over. And people run into other things, such as custody parameters being violated, or a spouse is not paying child support on time or at all. So, or properties haven't been released that should have been. So at any time, be it pre, during, or post-divorce, this guidebook could be an absolute asset to anyone.
What is, and this might be a really hard question to answer, but what is the number one thing that you advise, or the first step, or the first thing that people should do once they know that they're getting a divorce?
The first thing is, I tell people, you don't have to do everything all at once. I know that sounds very simplistic, but we right away want to jump. Oh, I have to get a lawyer. I have to do this. I have to get my finances together. The children, what's going to happen? We get into a panic mode. That's not necessary. It's knowing that you don't have to do everything at once. Second thing, which kind of slides a little bit into the first thing, is to start shopping for an attorney. Mm-hmm. Even in the best of scenarios, I recommend that anybody going through the process have an attorney on hand, somebody that they trust and they know that they can go to with legal questions and get the correct answers. Divorces become very complex. And oftentimes when people make mistakes, it's not because they are reckless. It's just because they don't know. So those are the two things. I know you asked for one, but there's two.
That's okay. I knew that was a hard question. And I actually really like the fact that you brought up attorneys, because I think that's got to be one of the scariest things. You talk about fear. Who should I hire? How do I know this is the right person for me? How much should I pay them? How does their retainer work? Can you talk a little bit about some of the things that people should look for, the criteria, when selecting their lawyer?
Absolutely. We have an entire section of the workbook that's devoted to finding the right attorney. One of the things that I hear pretty consistently from clients when they get to me is that they've been through 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 attorneys, nobody's working. And that's because we don't typically shop for attorneys. And not all attorneys are alike. I know that's sort of like a buzz phrase that I use frequently, but they really aren't. And not everybody meshes with the attorney. It's just like any relationship. So I suggest that people shop for an attorney. There are specific questions we have in our workbook that I suggest that people ask. Something just as simple as, how does the attorney communicate? Now, that seems like something really basic. What does that mean? Well, some people want to communicate with their attorneys every day, and others say, no news is good news. So that's something that needs to be ironed out, and it's really important during the interview process to get that hunkered down. So, as I mentioned, we have a whole section in the workbook devoted to interviewing attorneys, questions to ask, and answers that one should receive before they hire an attorney. We also talk about retainers and how attorneys are paid. That's very confusing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the scariest things too, and especially if somebody is going into a divorce and they're afraid if they're going to run out of money, or if they have the funds, the financial capacity to even, quote unquote, take on the fight.
Right, exactly. So we talk about that. We talk about what a retainer means, how the retainer gets used, how it can be depleted, and when it needs replenishing. I have so many clients that come to me and they don't have an attorney any longer because they can't pay their attorney. They didn't understand the retainer process. So not only do we talk about it in the workbook, but we also show examples of what a retainer looks like. And it really gets people to understand. And we do it in a simplistic way. It's not complex. One does not need to have a CPA to understand it. And we go through that process so people have an understanding when they do hire an attorney for their divorce, that this is how it typically plays out.
Now, in your opinion, too, sometimes some attorneys will intentionally drag things out because the longer things take, the more money they make. And likewise, in some situations, the resources of the people who are getting divorced might not be balanced. In other words, he or she, the ex-spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse, might have more financial resources than the other. What happens in a situation like that?
Great question, Desiree. And we talk about that in the workbook. And there are situations, oftentimes with stay-at-home moms, where the husband was working or one of the partners was working in same-sex relationships, and then the other is home with the children. And then during the divorce, somebody has more money than the other. The person that doesn't have as much money is called the disadvantaged spouse. I hate that term, but it is an actual legal term. And what that spouse can do is have their attorney ask the court for the other spouse to pay their legal fees. Now, that's a great idea, but think about it. There's marital assets. One is working. It's 50-50. Why would the person who's working get to take the money and get their legal representation and the other person cannot? And oftentimes people going into divorce don't know that. We talk about that in our guidebook. So let's say your attorney wants $20,000 and you don't have it. You're a stay-at-home mom. You've been a stay-at-home mom. The attorney can ask the courts, hey, you know what? He's got to pay for it. She's been home taking care of the kids, and he's taking money out of the marital assets, and so should she. So that's a great question, because people really get hung up on that. And that's something that keeps them from getting together with attorneys and going without representation.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've seen that too. People who try to, quote unquote, go it on their own, and that's probably not the wisest idea, especially if your ex-spouse has an attorney. You're just heading for a situation where you're going, it's a David and Goliath type battle in that case.
It is, and that's called pro se, when somebody goes into the court with or goes in without an attorney. And typically, if one side has an attorney and the other doesn't, they will not want to go to court, because the one side who doesn't have representation will bump up against so much legal terminology, and so many things that they can't object to. They just don't understand the whole zeitgeist of the process, and it just slows everything down. The judges have to stop everything to explain to the person who's there pro se. So oftentimes the judges will, not always, but I've seen it where judges will say, no, we're not going to do this. This party needs to get representation. Now, that said, there are courts throughout the country that have pro bono, which means free legal representation. I always recommend, and we have this also in the guidebook, to check with one's jurisdiction. Sometimes there are attorneys, fabulous attorneys, who actually give back to the community by providing services either free of charge or at very, very reduced rates. And so sometimes somebody who is the, quote, disadvantaged spouse can snag one of those attorneys, but you don't know they're there unless you ask for them. So we talk about that also in the book.
And it's great that you bring up the fact that different states are different, and familiarizing yourself with what happens within your state is so important. And another thing, too, you brought up some of the terminology, and I think that's important, especially if children are involved, because what might happen in that situation, as the court may appoint a guardian ad litem or somebody to represent the interests of the child. Do you want to talk about how that may work a little bit?
Yes. A guardian ad litem, also known as a best interest attorney, is appointed to the children that is completely unbiased, and they act as the children's attorney. So the person is not assigned by either of the parents' attorneys, and they are not supposed to be friends or know each other, and the court will appoint that individual. And then from there, that individual, depending on what is going on with the divorce and the parameters of the divorce and the age of the children, how far they or what they will typically do with that particular case. Usually a guardian ad litem, they are usually assigned when there is a contentious divorce. So a best interest attorney doesn't come to the forefront unless there's high conflict within the divorcing people.
And one of the things that I really appreciate in your book, too, and just what you do in general, is you help people keep perspective, because it's not just about all the legal stuff and how you getting the right lawyer and your finances. Yes, that's also important, but taking care of oneself is also important. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Would love to. We are creatures of, especially, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but women typically are caregivers, and so everything goes on the back. They go in the back burner while they take care of the children, they take care of the house, they run carpool, they get children back and forth to their sports and their activities. And the last person they take care of is themselves. At the end of the day, they're depleted, they're exhausted, and they can't function. They actually run themselves into the ground. In fact, I had somebody that I coached who ended up with fibromyalgia and could not get out of bed for 2 years. And so we really, as divorce coaches, we really talk about taking care of oneself. It's not being selfish. It's being selfless. A person is no good to their children if they can't get out of bed. So we talk about, and we put this in, I have it in the guidebook, about just making a little chart for people who have never taken care of themselves. Make a notation of things that you like to do, things that you've never done before. I had a woman once tell me that she started to dance, and another woman took up swimming, things they always wanted to do, they never had a chance to do, and just that once a week really rejuvenated them, and it's critical. So we have this chart where people can make a notation of any activity they want to do and stick to it. We find that when people write things down, fill out a little chart, they are more inclined to keep on that path, as opposed to just saying, I'm going to do this, and then they never get around to it. But if they have something Monday through Friday that they do, they are more likely to do it. I know I did it. I got up every morning at 5 a.m. and worked out 1 hour every day before I took my children to school, because I knew if I didn't do it then, my day would get away from me and I would never get around to it. And it really, when people say, what got you through your divorce? I said, believe it or not, it was getting up in the morning, working out for that hour, practicing yoga, and then my day would get started.
Divorce is a transformational thing, and it seems to me that when you're in the right mindset, when you are focused and doing something much like what you did, working out, swimming, yoga, doing something, and I'm going to key in on that, doing something that you've always wanted to do but never did, that this can be that time of your life. It's a metamorphosis. And yes, you're changing, and some really bad things are happening, some things that you never anticipated, and it's going to hurt you emotionally. But if you can take that and find something that's good, something that's going to be transformational in a positive way for yourself, I think that's a bit of the silver lining in all of this.
It is a silver lining, and I hear it all the time. There is a rare occasion where I run into a client or I run into somebody who I helped a couple years ago who doesn't say, I'm so glad I'm still practicing yoga, or I'm still running, or I just ran a marathon, or I just came back from a ballroom dancing competition and I came in second place. Something that really changed for the better as a result of their divorce. I rarely run into somebody who's downtrodden. And when they work with a coach, or they go through what we talk about in the guidebook, they really do come out the other side better. It is a change. It is a metamorphosis, but it is a transformation, and it can be positive.
Absolutely. And as women, as you said, women typically tend to be the caregivers, and so part of this is making sure that they're taking care of the kids. And I know one of the things that you do also help with is parental alienation, or when a child, one spouse, is alienated against the other. And this can be a devastating, traumatic, just awful time when somebody manipulates a child to do that. So first, if you wouldn't mind explaining what parental alienation is, maybe a little bit better than I do, but also talking about the positive, because one of the philosophies that you hold that I really respect and admire is the fact that one should never give up on their child, ever, ever, ever. So if you wouldn't mind answering that two-part question, one, what is parental alienation, and why should we never give up on our children?
Parental alienation, in its simplistic definition, is when one parent alienates the children or child from the other parent. So I call the parent who's doing the alienation the arrow, and the person who's on the receiving end the target. So I will use those two terms so that I don't have to say alienator several times. It's a mouthful. So it is. So the arrow comes after the target and does so by using the children as pawns to hurt that other parent or the target, and gets the children to lobby for them. So they take these unsuspecting children, and it doesn't take a lot, but they sort of get the child or children to align with them to the point where the children no longer want a relationship with the targeted parent. Whether the other parent has sullied the reputation of the targeted parent, exaggerated behaviors, or talked about that person's family, whatever the arrow has to do to alienate those children, they will. And so before the targeted parent realizes it, they have children who no longer want to visit them, don't even want to talk to them. If it goes severe, they won't return phone calls, they won't return letters, birthday cards, won't invite parents to special events at school or graduations, even weddings. And it can happen at any time. Usually the parent who's doing the alienating is able to, I don't want to say buy the children, but they have dangling carrots and accoutrements like vacations and clothes. Maybe they let teenagers have boyfriends and girlfriends sleep over, a more permissive kind of behavior where maybe the targeted parent wouldn't allow those type of things. And so whatever they're able to do, they do. And then they may bring some of their and there's a term that Dr. Stephen Miller has used called adultification, where they share a little bit too much with the child. They may say things like, I can't believe your mom is taking me to court again. Look at this. And they show the court proceedings, and that's scary to a child. And then they play the victim for the child, and the child aligns themselves with that parent. And so it really can happen quickly. It's insidious, and before the targeted parent realizes it, they don't realize what's happened, but it's already getting or has gotten to a pretty intense or severe state. What I tell people in the second part of your question is never give up. Never give up on your kids, because statistically, and I've interviewed many adults who were victims, and I say victims because this is victimizing children, people who are now in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond, who were alienating their parents. They did the dirty work of the alienating parent. Their parents gave up. The targeted parent gave up, and they didn't do it out of a lack of love for their children or child. They did it because they became exhausted. The attempts to talk to their children were unrequited. And those children say, or now they're adults, have said, I wish they never gave up. Mm. And that is across the board, Desiree. I have yet to meet an adult who was alienated who hasn't said that. Mm-hmm. And so that is the one thing I say, never give up. And I know it's frustrating. I know it's horrendous to send cards and letters and phone calls to not have them returned. Just keep doing it.
And I love that message of hope. And I think that's what it's all about, because it can be so incredibly discouraging. And there is a tendency for people to think, okay, maybe I'll just let things be. I'll step back. And once my child is an adult, they will see and understand everything, and then we'll have a relationship. And that never really works out that way, right?
You would think it would statistically, and I know we're limited on time, but statistically it doesn't happen that way. Children also, when they get so alienated, the reality of what they've been told about that targeted parent becomes actually the reality. And so there's been chaos swirling around the divorce, the years that they were alienated. So oftentimes they just can't revisit it for a myriad of reasons. So one would think they turn 18 and they would get on the phone and say, Dad, I'd love to chat with you now. It just doesn't work that way. What's even more tragic is that if they do come to that and they want to rekindle a relationship with that targeted parent, and that parent has died, is no longer living, how horrible. I mean, parental alienation just destroys parents, children, families. There's nothing good about it, but trying to stay connected to your child is imperative, because there are stories where, and I have an arsenal of them, where parents didn't give up. And I mean, I've shared a story about a woman who wrote a letter to her daughter once a month for 11 years.
Oh, wow.
11 years, and it's in our guidebook. And the daughter had been told by the dad the mother didn't love her, didn't care about her. Well, the letters were not getting to the daughter because the dad had a P.O. box, so that all the letters would go to him, and so he could keep them from the daughter. Well, guess what? He was on business. The daughter was 17. She thought, as a kind thing to her dad, she would go to the post office, pick up his mail, so he didn't have to pick it up when he got home late that night. And guess what she found? One of the letters. And the mom was smart, because every month when she wrote a letter, she started like, this is letter 1. Here's the date. I will write a letter to you once a month. So by the time this, 11 years, it was like, this is letter 430, but I've written to you every month. And that was the preamble of every letter. And then she would go into, you're probably graduating high school, or whatever milestone she thought her daughter was going through. Well, the dad came home from his trip. The daughter said, what is this? And of course, he couldn't at that point deny what he had done. The daughter called her mother, who was living just 20 minutes from her. And the mother said, come on over. Well, I'm happy to say they've rekindled the relationship. This was a few years back. The daughter moved in with the mom and went to college. She had received her college degree, and they have a great relationship. Now, they had 11 years to make up. The daughter has not talked to the dad. I don't think that's great. When I talk about kindling, I'd like to see children have a relationship with both parents. But if this dad, when people alienate, they think they're winning. There was no win here. The dad ultimately lost. Had he just let the daughter see the mom, there's no loss. But he couldn't help himself, and so he ultimately lost his daughter. The mom did not give up. I mean, she's a real hero. And I tell that story a lot when people get exhausted and they just want to stop. I go, well, here's something you can do. And I share this story.
And I love that you share stories like that within the book and on your website and in the courses and the webinars that you give as well. I mean, talking about heroes, Susan, you are a hero to so many people who you help out. And that's the core message, right? Never give up. And ultimately, if there are children involved, you'll hear it time and time again, the best interest of the child. I feel when parents truly adhere to what is in the best interest of the child, that's, and only that, is when everyone can win.
True.
Tell us really quick, because we're running out of time. Tell us more about some of the webinars that you offer, the courses that you offer. Tell us about your website and where people can find the book.
Okay, well, the website is www.susanshofer.com, and you can order the book through Amazon. You can order it through our website. Another one is coming out now. That is the Divorce Recovery Ladder, but one is coming out soon on parental alienation. We have webinars. We have courses. We have a course coming up in the fall specifically for parental alienation and how to navigate around it. And, so a lot of great things. We have a lot of I do consultations. So if anybody's interested on one-on-one.
And you are fabulous, and you are such a resource to people who need you. Thank you so much, Susan.
You are welcome, Desiree. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. And that's it. Our time is up. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on Books That Make You. And you can find out more on our website. That's booksthatmakeyou.com. And you can also follow on Facebook. And we're on Instagram as well. Until next time, please enjoy all of the books that make you who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.